Okay, welcome to the construction management portion of this presentation. I am still JoLaine Minor. Prior to the pre-construction conference, all documents must be signed, including the CDBG certification forms. Listed on your screen are examples of those who should attend the pre-construction conference. Absolutely, you should have the engineer, the grantee, contractors, subcontractors, and the grant administrator in attendance. What should be discussed at the pre-construction conference? Roles of the project, suppliers, subcontractors, public safety, easements, location of utilities, cleanup, shop drawings and approval of materials, change orders, pay requests, CDBG requirements, and labor standards. These are part of the certification that is required at the pre-construction conference, and the notice to proceed, which can be used to close the conference. This is also the time to complete the conformance documents that were sent by the labor standards officer if needed. This screen is just a sample of the pre-con certification form. You may conclude the pre-construction conference with the notice to proceed only if all contract documents are in order and executed. Do not complete the notice to proceed if you do not have a signed contract. The notice to proceed must clearly establish the construction start date, the scheduled project completion date, and the basis for assessing liquidated damages in the event of unsatisfactory performance by the general or subcontractors. A copy of the fully executed contract documentation and certification with original signatures must be maintained in the grantee's labor standards file, and it must include the lock-in wage rate determination. I will also say that if you have a conformance request, you must also include the original documentation and approval documentation for that conformance request with the fully executed contract documentation in the grantee's labor standards file. The required documentation for the pre-construction conference include the pre-construction conference checklist and minutes, including the sign-in sheet, the signed certification page, and any additional notes or comments. Listed on your screen are materials that are required to be submitted to the Labor Standards Officer for the pre-construction conference. Please note that the second to last items are the first and last certified payrolls for each contractor when they become available. I'm going to pause now for Kara Kozad to discuss pre-construction activities for the housing rehabilitation grants.
Hi, this is Kara Kozad again, and now we're going to talk about housing rehabilitation pre-construction activities. So let's go through the inspection process and hit some highlights on that. So this starts after the home is deemed eligible, the identification of the rehabilitation need through an initial assessment by the inspector. Before the inspector leaves the property, he or she must inform the homeowner of the types of work being considered. And it's very important that corrections to all code violations and energy efficiency improvements are prioritized in this rehab. Presumption of lead. The state's lead poisoning prevention code administered by the Illinois Department of Public Health was updated by the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules in early 2019. HUD's Lead Safe Housing Rule 24 CFR 35 were incorporated by reference into the code. So continuing on with the presumption of lead, HUD's rules state that where interim controls are required, the designated party or contractor has the option to presume that lead-based paint or paint hazards are present and that an evaluation is not required. If presumed, the contractor can proceed with treatments set forth in Section 35.1335. Contractors can presume lead-based paint hazards are present and do not need to proceed with an EBL evaluation. However, if the contractor is aware that an occupant has an EBL, the contractor must proceed with the evaluation set forth in JCAR Title 77, Chapter 1, Part 845.8.5. Specification and costs. Your housing inspector must prepare bid specifications by individual line item activities and provide corresponding in-house cost estimates using acceptable software programs. There's a limit of $50,000 spent per home, and photographs of individual homes to be rehabbed must be submitted to DCEO with all of your Tier 2s. Once the Tier 2 environmental clearance is received from DCEO, you can proceed to the next phase. And this is the competitive bidding process. So prepare your initial bid packets to be mailed to each qualified local contractor. Schedule a walkthrough with that qualified local contractor, and amendments to the original bid packets sent out can be done if applicable. You then move on to the formal bid opening. You contract that bid selected, and then you contract that signing and pre-construction conference. This includes contractor, administrator, inspector, and the homeowner.
Hi, this is JoLaine Miner again. I'm back to discuss construction management for public infrastructure projects. Once construction starts, you are responsible for checking weekly payrolls, visiting the worksite, and conducting employee interviews. Payrolls are submitted to the administrator every week and should include a statement of compliance signed by the contractor or subcontractor certifying that the payroll contains the required information to be provided, the appropriate information is being maintained, and that such information is correct and complete. It also certifies that each laborer, or mechanic is paid in full the weekly wages earned, and that each laborer or mechanic is paid not less than the prevailing wage rate in the contract. Please submit a copy of the first payroll for each contractor to the Labor Standards Officer as indicated in the Pre-Construction Conference checklist. Compare the payroll to the wage rate decision. The total payroll amount, which is the base plus fringe, must equal or exceed the federal prevailing wage rate. Any underpayments found while reviewing the payroll must be reported to the Labor Standards Officer. Owner-operator subcontractor payrolls must be signed off by the prime contractor. If you have an apprentice on the payroll, you must obtain a copy of the Department of Labor's certification of enrollment in an apprentice program. You must then send a copy to the Labor Standards Officer with the first payroll. This is an example of a weekly payroll. The employee does exceed the federal prevailing wage rate, even though the base pay is less. Visiting the worksite. Check that the following documents are posted at the worksite and where the employees sign in: the federal prevailing wage rate decision, and the following posters: your rights and notice to employees. You can obtain these posters at the websites listed. While at the worksite, and to document compliance, take a picture of the postings and keep them in the project file. To remain in compliance with Davis-Bacon, you must conduct employee interviews. Using the HUD 11 form, conduct several interviews of at least each craft. You must verify that payment is consistent with the prevailing wage rate and that the employee is doing work and using tools for the craft he is being paid. If an employee is performing work in more than one classification during the work week, the wage rate specified for each classification can be paid only if accurate time records are maintained showing the amount of time spent in each classification of work. If there is a dispute, the contractor will be asked to provide the employee's time records. If accurate time records are not maintained, the employee must be paid the highest wage rate of all the classifications for work performed. Force account labor. Force account labor can be used on construction projects, but it applies only to units of local government, not employees of a water or sewer district. Additional help can be hired for the project, but those helpers must be paid federal prevailing wages. Wage restitution. Underpayment of wages. Underpayment of wages is determined by taking the total wages, which is the base plus fringe earned minus the total wages paid. The administrator notifies the prime contractor in writing, describes the underpayments, and provides instructions for computing and documenting restitution to be paid. The prime contractor is allowed 30 days to correct the underpayments. The prime contractor is responsible to the contract administrator for ensuring that restitution is paid. If the employer is a subcontractor, the subcontractor will usually make the computation and restitution payments and furnish the required documentation through the prime contractor. When wage restitution is required, there must be a corrected certified payroll. It must reflect the period of time restitution is due, the payroll numbers or date sequence. It must include a signed statement of compliance, and it must be reviewed by the administrator. Please provide a copy to the Labor Standards Officer. While reviewing the corrected certified payroll, if discrepancies are found, you must notify the contractor of discrepancies in writing. Additional payments must be made within 30 days. Submit a corrected certified payroll, indicating that it is corrected certified payroll B. Again, a signed statement of compliance, and it must again be reviewed by the administrator with a copy to the Labor Standards Officer. Withholding. Withholding may be against the prime contractor to ensure the payment of wages due and unpaid. If wage underpayments are not corrected within 30 days after the written notification, only amounts needed to meet the contractor's liability may be withheld. CDBG grants are monitored for compliance. Grants are reviewed to ensure compliance with federal requirements in labor standards, the bid process, and EEO verification for minority and Section 3 businesses. Please be aware that Section 3 is changing. HUD has modified the way it tracks Section 3 reporting from new hires to labor hours. Please stay tuned for more information. Contract awards are monitored for bonding and insurance requirements, and your pre-construction conference materials are also monitored. Your labor standards file should contain a fully executed contract document and all signed certifications with original signatures. Your pre-construction conference materials, your wage rate determinations, your conformance documentation, all employee interviews, and remember that several interviews of at least each craft, all payroll documentation, all apprentice documentation, force account labor, and wage restitution. Well, good news. For those of you who are still awake, we survived. For those of you who have fallen asleep, you can wake up now because we're finished. Thank you.